in the early 14th century, at a time when much of the world was still disconnected by vast deserts and oceans. There lived a ruler whose wealth was so extraordinary that, centuries later, historians still struggle to measure it. His name was Mansa Musa, the emperor of the powerful Mali Empire. To many modern observers, especially in the United States, his story feels almost unbelievable. The idea that a single man could possess so much wealth that he could influence entire economies seems like something from legend. Yet, historical records from scholars, travelers, and merchants all point to the same conclusion. Mansa Musa was possibly the richest individual who has ever lived, and the scale of his wealth changed the course of history. His legendary journey across the Sahara in 1324 did not merely demonstrate power or devotion. It altered markets, reshaped cities, and left such a powerful impression on the medieval world that maps, drawn decades later, placed him holding a giant piece of gold in his hand. This is the story of the man whose fortune was so vast that it shook the global economy. To understand the rise of Mansa Musa, one must first understand the incredible power of the Mali Empire during the 13th and 14th centuries. This empire controlled vast territories across West Africa, stretching across lands that are today parts of Mali, Senegal, Niger, and Guinea. These lands were not just large, they were extraordinarily rich in natural resources, especially gold. At the time, West Africa produced a massive portion of the world's gold supply. Gold from the Mali Empire traveled along ancient trade routes across the Sahara Desert, eventually reaching markets in North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Camels carried salt, ivory, and textiles across dangerous desert paths, but the most precious cargo was always gold, and the emperor who ruled this empire controlled access to those resources. That emperor was Mansa Musa. When he ascended to the throne around 1312, he inherited not just a kingdom, but a vast economic powerhouse capable of influencing trade across continents. The story of how Mansa Musa became emperor is itself fascinating. According to historical accounts, the previous ruler of the empire, Abu Bakr II, was obsessed with exploring the Atlantic Ocean. He reportedly organized a massive expedition of ships to discover what lay beyond the horizon. Some historians believe he hoped to reach new lands across the ocean, possibly centuries before European explorers like Christopher Columbus would attempt similar journeys. Before leaving, Abu Bakr II appointed Musa as his deputy. When the fleet sailed west into the unknown, it never returned. With the emperor gone, Musa officially took the throne and became the new ruler of the Mali Empire. His leadership would transform the kingdom into one of the most powerful and culturally influential states in the medieval world. Musa was not only a ruler of wealth, he was also deeply religious, intellectually curious, and determined to elevate his empire's reputation across the Islamic world. One of the most important traditions for a Muslim ruler was the pilgrimage to Mecca, known as the Hajj. By the year 1324, Mansa Musa decided it was time to undertake this sacred journey. But unlike ordinary pilgrims, he did not travel quietly or modestly. He organized one of the most spectacular processions the medieval world had ever seen. His caravan, reportedly, included tens of thousands of people. Soldiers, officials, servants, scholars, and slaves traveled alongside him. Camels marched across the desert, carrying massive quantities of gold. Historical sources suggest that hundreds of camels were loaded with gold dust and gold bars. Each camel carried enormous weight, and attendants walked alongside distributing the wealth generously along the journey. This was not just a religious pilgrimage. It became a moving display of unimaginable riches that stunned every city it passed through. As the caravan crossed the Sahara, it passed through major trade centers such as Timbuktu and eventually reached Cairo, one of the most important cities in the Islamic world. At the time, Egypt was ruled by the powerful al-Nasir, Muhammad. When news spread that the emperor of Mali had arrived with mountains of gold, the city was filled with curiosity and excitement. Mansa Musa's arrival became the talk of Cairo. He distributed gold generously to the poor, gave lavish gifts to officials, and spent enormous amounts in local markets. The generosity of the emperor impressed everyone, but it also created an unexpected economic consequence. By giving away and spending so much gold in a short period of time, Mansa Musa dramatically increased the supply of gold circulating in the city. Economics teaches that when supply increases rapidly, the value of a commodity can fall. This is exactly what happened in Cairo. The sudden flood of gold caused inflation, and the value of gold dropped significantly. Prices began to shift, and merchants noticed that the precious metal was no longer as scarce as it had been before. Historians later estimated that the economic disruption lasted for more than a decade. In other words, the wealth of one man temporarily destabilized a regional economy. This extraordinary event became one of the most famous economic stories in history. When people today claim that Mansa Musa crashed the gold market, they are referring to this very moment in 1324. It remains one of the rare examples in history where a single individual's spending power visibly influenced international markets. After completing his pilgrimage to Mecca, Mansa Musa did not simply return home quietly. During his travels, he encountered scholars, architects, and artists from across the Islamic world. Deeply impressed by the intellectual and cultural achievements of cities like Cairo and Mecca, he decided to bring that knowledge back to his empire. He recruited scholars, teachers, and architects to accompany him back to West Africa. His goal was to transform the Mali Empire into a center of learning and culture. One of the most famous individuals he brought back was the architect, Abu Ishaq as-Sahili, who would later help design important buildings in the empire. When Mansa Musa returned to West Africa, he launched a remarkable period of construction and cultural development. Cities such as Timbuktu became global centers of scholarship. Mosques, universities, and libraries were built throughout the empire. The famous Sankore University became one of the greatest intellectual institutions of the medieval world. Scholars traveled from across Africa and the Middle East to study there. Manuscripts on astronomy, law, mathematics, and philosophy filled the libraries. These achievements demonstrated that Mansa Musa's legacy was not just wealth. He used his fortune to invest in education, religion, and architecture, creating a cultural golden age that would influence West Africa for centuries. News of Mansa Musa's wealth spread far beyond Africa and the Islamic world. European cartographers began to hear stories about the emperor whose empire overflowed with gold. In 1375, a famous map known as the Catalan Atlas depicted Mansa Musa sitting on a throne, holding a large golden nugget in his hand. This image symbolized how Europeans viewed West Africa at the time. It was seen as a mysterious land of immense riches. The legend of Mansa Musa became so powerful that it influenced exploration centuries later. Some historians believe that stories of African gold contributed to European interest in exploring the Atlantic and the western coast of Africa. Even today, when people attempt to calculate the wealth of Mansa Musa, the numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. Some estimates suggest that if his fortune were converted into modern terms, it would be worth hundreds of billions of dollars, possibly even more than the wealth of modern billionaires such as Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. But historians often emphasize that such comparisons are imperfect. The economic systems of the medieval world were very different from modern capitalism. What remains undeniable is that Mansa Musa controlled an enormous share of the world's gold production, which gave him influence unlike almost any other ruler in history. The story of Mansa Musa continues to fascinate modern audiences, especially in countries like the United States, where people are often intrigued by stories of extreme wealth and economic power. But what makes this story truly remarkable is not just the gold or the riches. It is the way one man used his wealth to reshape trade, inspire cultural development, and leave a legacy that still echoes through history. Today, the name of Mansa Musa represents more than just wealth. It represents a moment when Africa stood at the center of global trade and culture, and when the actions of one extraordinary emperor demonstrated that power. Economics and history are often shaped by individuals whose stories continue to inspire the world. Centuries later,